The CMO Confidential podcast is a proud member of the I Hear Everything podcast network. Looking to launch or scale your podcast? I Hear Everything delivers podcast production, growth, and monetization solutions that transform your words into profit. Ready to give your brand a voice? Then visit iheareverything.com.
Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer at Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com. I'm here today with my guest, John Miller. Today's topic: the Gumball machine is broken, rethinking B2B marketing. Now, John is the co-founder and former CMO of Marketo, founder and former CEO of Engagio, former CMO of Demandbase, and a board member of several startups. Notice there's a lot of things he did there that end in O. I don't know what that has to do with the show, but it just occurs. He is currently working on a new venture, which is in stealth mode. And he is also a fearless prognosticator, publishing a yearly list of B2B predictions, which we will talk about during the show. Welcome, John.
Awesome. Great to talk to you today.
All right, John, let's start with this concept of the Gumball machine for B2B. Tell our listeners, what is the Gumball machine and why is it broken?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a metaphor for what I just call the playbook, the marketing playbook we've been following for years. And I am somewhat responsible for helping to promote that old playbook. At Marketo, we went around and we said, this is how you do marketing. You use content to generate leads. You capture them and then you nurture them with emails. You score them and you pass them to an SDR at the right time. You have other SDRs that are doing outbounding, to reach out.
And SDR, just we don't have half our show is B2B, the other half not B2B. SDR is sales development rep, right?
Yeah. Kind of a junior salesperson that's gonna, try to bring the human part to the whole system. And everything about this playbook was meant to be highly measurable, highly quantitative. I would even go to people and say, the way you should set your marketing budget is you should calculate that, well, I need this much pipeline, which means I need this many opportunities, which means I'm going to need this many leads, which means I need to run this many marketing programs. And like literally kind of do that backwards math. And that's the origin of where the whole thing starts to fall apart. Because,
go ahead.
It starts to make you think of marketing being like a gumball machine where I can just put my quarter in and get my gumball out. I can run my campaign and I can get a buyer. And that's not how things work.
Right. But this basically also assumed that it's marketing qualified leads, MQLs, right? That came out of this thing for B2B marketers. And the concept here is I put this marketing campaign out for X money and MQLs, which are essentially the gumballs, come out. Is that right? Am I describing it right?
And that those gumballs that come out are going to become customers.
Right.
And marketing is a much more complex machine. There's hundreds of examples that you can point to for this, right? Where that person comes to your website and fills out a form because they want to get a demo request, right? And it turns out it's because they talked to somebody that you marketed to 18 months ago.
Right.
So it's a nonlinear system that can't be tuned and optimized the way you would, tune and optimize a repeatable machine.
But when you came out with Marketo and everything, though, that was at the beginning of all this, where actually the Gumball machine worked because no one had actually used it before, right? Is that kind of why this thing took off and you could standardize it across all the B2B businesses? And as it becomes more normalized, the concept breaks down because you still have to fill the Gumball machine up with new gumballs. Is that a fair way to look at it?
I think that's a great point, that when it was new and innovative, it worked better, but buyers have gotten pretty savvy and annoyed by all those traditional tactics. They've learned that if they go to your website and fill out a form, you're going to start emailing them and calling them with stuff that they don't want. So yeah, they're opting out and tuning out. They're doing more stuff anonymously, and that just is all the more reason why this gumball missing mentality just it's not working. It hasn't worked for the last couple of years.
And when I think about it, though, and we've done a bunch of shows on why B2B marketing is no good and what to do about it. This is another look at it, which is people are still using that gumball machine and pounding on their CMOs to get more leads. But you're saying they're not going to happen because the leads are a lot more savvy now. The marketplace is a lot more mature. And you also say you think AI is going to accelerate the decline of B2B marketing as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. Like a lot of people already have like Google promotions tabs in their inbox, right? That's a version of AI deciding which emails go in your primary inbox and which ones go to promotions, right? But I also have Gemini now in my Google inbox. Gemini can read my emails. It can summarize them. It can synthesize them. We're not so far away from me just getting a digest that says, here are the emails you got today. Here are the, you can ignore these 17. These 5 you need to pay attention to, and I've already drafted your reply, right? That's like what we're also seeing on websites today with zero-click search.
Yeah.
Where people do a Google search. They don't even have to come to my website anymore to get their answers. So AI is disintermediating our search. It's disintermediating our email. Those old tactics that we were doing before, aren't going to work in the age of AI. We need a new playbook.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the playbook in a minute. I want to kind of tie this up a little bit on why the gumball machine is broken.
Yep.
We also did a show called Your Next Best Customer May Be an AI Bot, in which case we talked about customers aren't going to come to your website. You've got to be out there to be found, and you have to be doing good. But you're saying a lot of B2B is still stuck in the old way of doing things, and AI is going to even make that harder on marketers now.
Yeah. I mean, any B2B CMO listening on this call, I would be willing to bet has had a tough few years, right? And unless they're at some like outlier company, right, where they are probably not making the pipeline goals. I can almost guarantee you they had some meeting where the CFO came to them and they said, all right, well, we need to grow 25% next year, but the win rates are down. So you got to generate 35% more pipeline. Oh, but your budget's going to be flat. And the CMO is probably looking at that and saying, I didn't even make my pipeline goals this year.
Yeah.
Right. And that somehow you think it's going to be different next year because I'm going to work just a little harder. No, it doesn't work that way. We need a fundamental rethink about how are we trying to generate our pipeline and our revenue, which is going to start from a recognition of some of these things we talked about. Marketing is a complex machine. It is not a linear machine that can just be gumball in, leads out, right? Which we'll get into. That means thinking about longer term investments like brand. AI is going to disintermediate our traditional tactics, which means we need to start thinking about things that AI can't disintermediate, like relationships and experiences, right? Like we got to evolve how we're thinking about this because what's undeniable is it's not working.
I like that. I think that's a good pivot to the next question, which is, when I look through your predictions and read some of your stuff, one of the things you said is the future is going to go to those who do right by the customer. Tell us what you mean by that in B2B.
Yeah, where that came from was, I've been talking to marketers for 18 months now about this old playbook isn't working.
Yeah.
And obviously people are like, okay, I believe you. What should I do differently? And I had all these lists of things that they should do differently. Like, don't gate your content, right?
Yeah.
That's good for the buyer. Like, publish your pricing because people want to know that without having to kind of, go talk to a salesperson. Make it easy to learn and experience about your product. These are all things, that are right by the customer. Don't bombard them with SDR calls just because they filled out a form. Right. And there are all these things that I could say, this is what you should do better in the new playbook. And I realized what they all had in common was that, it's about treating the buyer as a relationship to be built and not a lead to be captured. And, the more, and it's funny because the reality is this, what's old is new again, right? I'm basically saying, understand the customer, build a brand, that's going to be emotionally engaging with them. We can go on like invest in the insights so that you know how they think, create communities where they can learn from each other, and have content that's so valuable they'd pay for it but give it away for free. Right? What if you do all this right? What should happen is you're building that mental availability and that awareness, so that way when they do think about having a problem, right, you're going to actually be on that short list, which if you're not on the short list by the time they start a sales cycle, you're dead. It's not going to happen.
So I started at P&G, and I'm a fundamental believer in the brands and the customer experience and all that. So it's music to my ears. And if you look back, this customer approach has been around a long time, since, Procter and Brand Management and the Deming studies. But many companies, especially in B2B, I guess I would go on a limb and say, they're like that CFO that just came in and said, do a lot more, doing the same thing with less money. We got to make this quarter or we're going to get pounded by our investors. What's going to make it different this time? And is B2B really ready for this kind of change in a large way?
I think we've just got to start by this whole idea of the Gumball machine came out of this concept of revenue marketing.
Right.
Where B2B marketers had this bad rep 20 years ago of just, you're the people who throw parties and make color brochures.
Right.
And sales got all the glory because they drove revenue, and marketers like, no, we drive revenue too. And look at the MQLs that we create and all that kind of stuff. And that revenue mindset was the right thing, but it led to that kind of short-term Gumball machine thinking. What needs to happen is we need to kind of redefine, what does driving revenue mean? Being a revenue marketer isn't just I generate MQLs. Being a revenue marketer needs to become, you put in place the conditions that will ultimately drive long-term revenue.
Hey, John, let me jump in and make sure I'm hearing this right. The Gumball machine really works as long as there's an unlimited supply of gumballs. What you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, is there's not so many gumballs, and those gumballs are now moving a lot more independently. In fact, they don't even show up in the machine. They are out there in the wild, and you have to go find them. Is that and what used to be the marketers just pulled them out of the machine and gave them the sales force. Now the gumballs are everywhere. Is that fair?
All right. Yeah, I see. You're pulling the analogy. Yeah. These gumballs are not just sitting around the machine waiting to come out, right? They're on their own, having their own autonomous journeys, doing complex things on their own right. And again, I think the research says, that you can't do things that will make them enter a buying cycle. Right? They will enter the buying cycle at the time that's right for them. But if you're not on the short list, 80% of the time, they've already picked the winner by the time they've done that. Right? So you've got to think about your marketing not as being demand creation or demand generation, because you can't really generate demand, but you have to build that awareness, and then be ready to be mentally available when they're there, right? Which again, this from P&G. This is not rocket science.
No, but this is a big deal though, because you have to build a relationship with all these gumballs out there in space.
Yeah.
When you started your companies, there was only one way to do the work. People were just getting into the internet, just figuring it out. And now there's a million ways to connect with them. And you're saying the gumballs are now independent. The rise of the gumballs.
Yeah. But I want to go back to what you said a second ago. I think that this change is inevitable because what we're doing isn't working, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or happen overnight. I think that, the problem that CMOs get into is they still have a CFO or a board that demands quarterly results.
Yeah.
And they have private equity investors that are basically saying, you need to report to me monthly how many MQL gumballs you created. And so as leaders, we need to be part of changing the conversation. And I think it's got to start with some of the things we've talked about, like a recognition that what we've been doing doesn't work, that the way people buy has changed, and that therefore we need a different set of tactics and a different set of metrics for marketing. It's funny, that's about marketing the marketing.
Also about that everybody in the B2B space saying the whole marketplace is different. It's not just that the marketing is broken. Right?
Yeah, not every CMO will have that credibility.
Right. And not every CFO will think about it. So who's doing it well right now? If I look at this and I think, are there any companies or industries you would say are on the forefront of this new way of doing it, where you're actually marketing, relationships versus the gumball, the MQLs?
Yeah. Well, I mean, assume you're asking about B2B companies specifically.
Yeah,
but
B2B, because a lot of B2Cs, I think, do this pretty well.
I think that's sort of the point. I think B2B needs to learn a lot from B2C and how they've done branding and built, kind of that mental availability kind of over time. But I think, for example, two companies that I've been impressed with what they're doing specifically on the content side of things are Gong and Carta. Gong makes call recording software. They would say it's bigger than that, sales enablement, but ultimately they record sales calls and then they can analyze those. And you use it for training and coaching and other use cases for Gong. But one of the things that they do is they now have, literally millions of calls recorded and an understanding of how those calls led to outcomes like deals. And then they create these reports by analyzing that proprietary data. The one they're most famous for is research that says when and how should you swear on a sales call?
God damn it. Tell me about that, John.
They've got the data. And again, what apparently they found is if you swear first, that's not good. If you swear after the buyer has sworn, you actually have the best chance of winning the deal, right? Like basically matching your buyer's swearing there. But the point is that's cool data, and that there's and salespeople want to know the answers to the questions that they're researching. And as a result, you talk to most sales leaders, at least in technology companies, they know who Gong is, right? And they've done it by using their own proprietary data to create insights, which is not asking ChatGPT to write a blog post. This is actually publishing something kind of unique and valuable. Carta does something similar. Carta is a cap table management system. So thousands of startups share data about their investors and their employees' ownership and their founders' owners with Carta. And then they produce amazing stats that, to me as a founder, tells me exactly how I should think about my next fundraising round and how much equity I should give to my employees versus my investors. And because they have all this data that they can publish.
Well, give me an example of what Carta might tell you. And I know Carta, but not this way. What would they tell you, like on your cap table as a founder, that you should?
So they would say like the median Series A is at a pre-money valuation of $48 million and is raising $12 million and has an employee option pool of 14%. right? And that's the median.
Right.
Here's the 25th percentile and here's the 75th percentile, right? But again, they have the data to make this kind of things. But the point is less Gong does this for salespeople or Carter does this for entrepreneurs. It's more, what data do you have that allows you to produce some proprietary insights that your buyers are going to resonate with, that only you can produce. That, I think, is a fabulous way to be building brand awareness in B2B these days. And then, the other one is just people talking about who are building great experiences, great communities. And, I was talking to, there are lots of companies who do this well, especially for their top customers. But I was talking to the woman who runs this function for Salesforce.
Yeah.
Right. Their executive engagement, committee. And I mean, they've got a big budget to spend, but yeah, they're taking people to F1 event, and other things like that. But it's, again, when you can create an experience and connections, AI is never going to take that away.
Got it. If I'm a B2B agency out here in the world now, and or I'm a CMO sitting here looking at my agencies and my MarTech stack, what should I be thinking about in addition to the concept of I gotta build relationships, the brand matters? How should I be thinking about all the relationships I have with everyone invested in that stack and in my current set of creative now?
I mean, we can take that question a lot of different answers. I'll say, if you're a CMO, one thing that I'm seeing some CMOs do is redefine the CMO title. You might have heard somebody else on the podcast talk about this, but there are people who call themselves chief market officers.
Yeah.
That have chief marketing officers. And the reason why is because marketing is otherwise the only CXO function named after the act of doing the job and not the outcome. Right? It's not a chief selling officer or chief financing officer.
Right.
So I get that. At the end of the day, I don't give one, what about whether you
don't swear till I swear first, John.
A chief market officer or a chief marketing officer. I don't care about that. But what I care about is, can you have that conversation about the changing role of marketing? And that it is about understanding the market and being strategic rather than tactical and having long-term value creation over short-term metrics. And if having a conversation about rechanging your title can prompt that conversation, I think that's potentially important. And then you asked about,
go ahead.
Oh, you also asked about MarTech stacks, and that's obviously near and dear to my world.
Yeah.
We started Marketo the same month my son was born. He's a freshman at college now. So literally this month is the 19th birthday. These old legacy tech stacks are not going to take us into the next AI-enabled generation. I think what we want, is the irony of marketing automation is that it didn't actually automate anything, and that we had to hire people to run the marketing automation. But what if we actually had a platform that could truly automate the marketing? I think if we could do that, we could have technology to focus on the ING of marketing. So as humans, we could actually focus on the market. And I think that's exciting.
I like the market thing. And I was Kate Bolus.
She's well known for preaching this. Yep.
Yeah. And does a lot of B2B CMO searches, who is very passionate about what you just said, which is your job is to understand and take it and manage the market. It's not just to do the marketing. So I think that's a really good call out. So if I'm sitting here in this space as a marketer, I'm looking at 2025, what should I be targeting to do in the remainder of 2025 that keeps me on the front end of where the new machine is going?
So I think a big part of what we talked about is, how can you start thinking about adjusting your mindset to be a little bit more demand focused or brand focused versus demand focused. LinkedIn did a study a while back with Benet and Field where they updated the classic recommendations for Dave Field. And they ended up saying that recommending 56% demand, 46% brand, which is, I think, a higher investment in brand than most B2B companies are doing. That causes stress and agita for a lot of people I talk to, right? Because like, well, how do I make that measurable? And, all that kind of thing. I had a conversation with the CMO of Grammarly that I thought was insightful on this topic. At the end of the day, the brand isn't about your color or your logo. The brand should be, what is that set of feelings that you want your target buyers to feel about you?
Yeah.
And it ideally is one or two words. It's something very simple that you just kind of need to inject into their consciousness. For Grammarly, she's very clear on what that is, because most people think of Grammarly, at least I did, as like the tool that their kids use to kind of check, their school papers.
Yeah.
But what they want to be is they want to be an enterprise AI content solution. And so she knows what her job is, right? Is how do I get more of the people I care about to think of Grammarly the way I want them to think about Grammarly?
Yeah.
So she then said, I'm going to spend one less trade show than I would have otherwise done this year. I'm going to take the money that I would have spent on that trade show and use it to do a more traditional brand tracking study, right?
Yeah.
How much my audience thinks about me the right way. And then she can track that over time. And she can say at the end of the year, how did we move the needle on this number one thing that we all said is the number one thing that matters? So it does mean spending less on some of these gumball tactics that may not work anymore, and having the courage to say, I'm going to put it more into these things like proprietary content programs and experiences, but I'm going to track it by really moving the needle on knowing what what I want people to think and feel about me.
So she probably worked with her CFO to say, I'm going to lose this many MQLs out of this trade show, but this will be worth it. And she's bringing the company along tastefully without having a massive fight of saying, I'm going to cut our trade shows in half or something.
You got them to MQLs was a vanity metric that didn't actually measure value.
Yeah.
And what mattered is these other metrics around, who are the accounts that we care about? What do they think of us? Are they engaging with us? And when you can, she was able to move the conversation forward in that way. That's I think what we really need to be focusing on.
I like the vanity metric thing, because I think actually a bunch of brands do this or a bunch of companies do this where they care more about traffic, or they care more about likes than they actually, and whether those translate into sales or anything, they can get lost in the vanity metric, particularly if they're doing compensation wrong and paying for the vanity metric.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's good. Let's talk about your predictions, because every year you make a bunch of predictions. And we haven't touched on your predictions for 2025, or maybe we have in some of this discussion. What predictions do you want to put out there for our listeners?
Yeah, well, good news, we've hit a bunch of the big ideas, right? We've talked about breaking free from the gumball machine, reframing marketing's role in revenue, balancing the budget towards brand, as well as how AI is going to change buying by disintermediating our marketing, and therefore our need to focus on things like experiences and relationships. The one other set of things that we didn't really talk as much about, I think, is AI agents. And that I think it's tough for us humans to really understand just all the changes that are going to be coming here. But for example, I think marketing operations is a function that exists in most B2B companies. And I love marketing operations people, but the reality is they're often a bottleneck on what we want to do. Like, oh, I want to do more. Oh, but we only have so much capacity.
Right.
There will be marketing operations agents that, literally you can be in Asana and create a task and assign the task to the agent, and the agent will go build the campaign for you, and build your landing page for you, or whatever the things are, or, clean this list of data. That's going to be pretty profound, right? As we start seeing these agents take on tasks, and I think free us from the bottlenecks so that we can do more things. We're already seeing agents on the sales side. I frankly think most of them aren't very good, but there's this big rise of AI SDRs, where I think a lot of companies are using these AI SDRs today for outbound prospecting, which I think unfortunately ends up just being more spam. But I think there are interesting use cases for these sales agents, especially on the inbound side, right? So, if you want to see a demo, right, what should you really have to fill out a form, wait for an SDR to call you, schedule a meeting, do a discovery call, and then finally you can get a demo, right? 3 weeks later, somebody's going to come along with an AI agent that can just give you your personalized demo right then and right there. And if you can do that, your competitors 3 weeks later, who do you think is going to win?
Right. Well, so you're saying the agentic AI will just compress the entire timeline for someone that really wants to look at a demo or something, right?
I think when somebody's ready to raise their hand in the buying cycle, they don't want to ready,
Yeah.
So anyway, you already, I think, talked a little bit earlier about in earlier episodes around agents. So we're going to have to start marketing to agents. We're going to start talking about, agent qualified leads or whatever the name's going to be. It also potentially will change pricing, right? If you're a SaaS vendor that sells by seat,
yeah,
there might be fewer seats to sell if agents are doing more of the work. So there's just some pretty profound things that are coming, and I'm not going to get all those right, because could you imagine if you would be able to predict Uber in 1999, you'd be really rich. But the reality is we didn't even conceive that such a thing might be possible.
No, and even when it started, no one believed it was going to work. So any other predictions you want to share with our listeners for the year?
I guess the last one is, I really do think, and this is a prediction I'm working to try to make happen, that we're going to see a new era of marketing platforms built for the age of AI. Personally, I'm pretty excited for that.
Excellent. We'll bring you back on the show when that shows up. This brings us to our traditional last question. John, it's a two-parter. Practical advice for our listeners we haven't talked about yet, or the funniest story you can tell on the air. You can pick one or both, but you have to pick at least one.
All right. Well, first, I'll just bring in, because we're talking about it in the pre-show. My first company was called Marketo.
Yep.
My second company was called Engagio.
And you were CMO of a lot of these too.
With CMO of companies. The best thing I ever heard about Engagio was that it's a Harry Potter spell for marketers. When I was trying to find a new name for this new company that I'm doing, the name I originally came up with was going to be Conducto. Because it's kind of like an orchestra conductor orchestrating all the interactions, right? And then I'd have Marketo, Engagio, and Conducto. But my wife convinced me that Conducta sounded better than Conducto.
All right.
So I bought the URL conducta.com. But there's a company that I've been friendly with. I've known their CEO for a long time, a company in the SEO space called Conductor.
Mm.
And out of a courtesy, I decided to call the CEO and just say, hey, I'm starting a new company called, and I just want to give you a heads up. And he's like, oh, no problem. Let's talk. Hey, I'm getting in the elevator. So talk to me while I'm going. And right as he's getting in the elevator, I say, yeah, so the company's going to be called Conducta. But what I didn't think about the fact is that this guy's from New York. And how does a New Yorker, the head of Conductor, what does he call his company? Right? Like Conducta. No, you're Conductor. I'm Conducta. Anyway, he didn't like that. So needless to say, Conducta is not the name of my new company. And the new company, I'm not going to reveal the name of yet, but is not a 3-syllable word ending in a vowel.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, thank you, John. And thanks to everyone for listening to CMO Confidential. Look for more of our shows on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and the I Hear Everything network, which include Why is B2B Marketing So Bad and What to Do About It? Parts 1 and 2. Is your next best customer an AI bot? The Warby Parker case, I can see clearly now with my CLTV glasses on. And it's a bird. It's a plane. Holy shit, it's AI. Parts 1 and 2. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.